Now that we have covered the major differences between display and system units, we'll take a look at merging files designed in a different scale than that of your current project. Open the file garage.max and take a look at it. This is the same file used in the last movie, minus the animated camera. Start by checking out the units setup. The display units are currently set to feet and inches, while the system units are set to the default inches option. This simple file is typical of a set of models that you can reuse in other scenes. It has fairly simple geometry. But let's take a look at how materials and mapping are handled. The roof is based on a map scalar modifier to define the scale and the flow of the shingles. The cement floor is based on an unwrap Uvw modifier for maximum flexibility as to how each face is mapped. The foundations are using a Uvw Map modifier in box mode and a gizmo size that defines the size of the projected image. The walls, on the other hand, are also using a Uvw Map modifier in box mode, but are set to use real-world map size. This is significant because while all other objects have projections defined by a gizmo of some sort, the walls are relying on a bitmap image size to define the size of the bricks. This is where you have to be extra careful, as real-world mapping can be confusing when moving from one project scale to another. Let's simulate the problem and learn how to overcome it. As mentioned at the beginning of this movie, this file is based on system units set to inches. Let's see what happens when you merge this garage into a scene with a different system unit setup. Reset 3ds Max and consider this reference image you downloaded for this tutorial. It shows a top view of a small country house with a detached garage. The lot is 100 by 100 feet with a margin of 4 feet on each side. This makes the overall size of the picture 108 by 108 feet. With that in mind, let us assume you decide to work this project using a system unit setup in feet. Draw a plane and make it 108 feet across. You can bring the number of divisions down. Center it to the scene. This is always a good starting point. If you want, you can also dismiss the grid by pressing G. To apply the reference image to the displaying object, simply drag the site.jpg image using Windows Explorer. This is your basic setup before any modeling is started. Save your file in the folder where you have stored the asset files to ensure all support files are in the same place. Name it My Country House SU Feet to remind you that you set up this project in system units set to feet. The idea here is that you would need to model the house, but you already have a detached garage model that you can reuse. Don't worry, you won't have to model the house this time around, as this is not the purpose of this tutorial. Mind you, it is worth mentioning that the house can be built using different techniques. You can opt to work with simple extrusions, box modeling, or use AEC tools such as wall objects to lay down the basics. Whichever method you choose, and because you are working on architectural models, chances are you would want to use real-world scale to ensure your textures are consistent throughout the scene. In fact, real-world map scale is the default setup in 3ds Max Design, which is targeting architectural users. This lets you define materials based on maps that can be measured in real-world dimensions. This square image of red bricks, for example, can easily be measured. A brick is generally 8 inches wide, making this particular square image 40 inches by 40 inches, 5 bricks across in the real world. When set accordingly, and applied to the walls, the brick's layout appears properly sized. So, what happens when you merge a model that was created using a different scale? Use the Merge tool to merge the garage.max file. Merge all geometry objects. You don't need to worry about the lights for now. Make sure you auto-rename duplicated materials so you don't lose what you already created. Once the garage is merged, move it into its intended position. At first glance, everything looks good. Certainly size-wise, there are no apparent problems here. The Merge tool took care of any needed scaling so that the width, length, and height of the structure work well in the scene. In fact, select any object that makes the garage and choose the Scale tool. Note the transform type ins and that the scale of any object that makes the garage is still set to 100%. This is significant, and this is how it should be. Whatever scaling that needed to be done was done at the sub-object level. This is the major difference between merging Max files between 3ds Max projects and importing other file types from third-party applications. We'll cover that shortly. So, the size of the garage works well in this new scene, even though the garage was designed in a different scale unit. However, a closer look does show a problem with mapping. Any mapping coordinates that were using a gizmo of some sort to define projections are working flawlessly. The roof, foundations, and cement floor do not need any interventions. The walls, though, certainly have a problem. The bricks on the walls are way too small now. In fact, 12 times too small as we moved from an inch base unit to a foot base unit. There are 12 inches to a foot. You could potentially readjust the bitmap sizes to 40 by 40 feet instead of 40 by 40 inches. This, however, beats the purpose of working in real-world scale and real-world dimensions. So, where the geometry and most mapping coordinates were translated properly from scene to scene, real-world map scale gets a little off when going from one unit setup to another. Make sure the walls are selected and check out the Uvw Map Parameters in the Modify panel. Note the grayed out gizmo sizes set to 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. They're grayed out because you are using real-world map size. They're set to 1 inch across because they originate from a project setup with system units set to inches. Here, they need to be set to 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot to match the unit scale of the current project. Disable and then re-enable real-world map size to reset these values, which are now showing as 1 foot across. Now, the bricks on the garage and the house walls are the same size. It's a minor annoyance, but one you should be made aware of when you use real-world maps and merge files of different scales across projects. In the next movie, you learn to overcome similar problems when importing files created in other 3D applications.